The orc mother's calloused hand tightened around her daughter's smaller green fingers as they approached the corner shop with its painted window display. And Finnegan Collier watched from behind the glass. As she did what she always did, quickened her pace, dropped her gaze, and pulled both children past without a single glance at the wooden horses and cloth dolls arranged on the sill. He had been watching this happen for 3 weeks now, ever since he had taken over the lease from old Hendricks, who had run a cobbler's shop in this space. Finnegan had converted it slowly, methodically, the way he did everything since Margaret had died 2 winters past. The toy shop had been her dream, spoken of in those final fevered days when the lung sickness had taken her voice down to whispers. He had built it for a ghost, but lately he found himself building it for the living too. The orc woman was younger than he had first assumed, perhaps 25 to his 38 years. Her skin was the deep green of summer leaves, and she wore her black hair in a single thick braid that hung past her shoulder blades. The little girl who clung to her hand could not have been more than 6, with the same green skin and small tusks just beginning to show when she smiled. The boy was younger, maybe 4, and he was the one who always looked back at the window with longing so naked it made Finnegan's chest ache. They walked toward the bakery 3 shops down where the orc woman worked before dawn, kneading dough in the back room where customers would not see her and take offense. Finnegan knew this because he woke early too, unable to sleep past the hour when Margaret used to rise. He had seen the woman arrive in darkness, the children drowsy and stumbling, and watched her leave when the sun climbed high enough that respectable folk filled the streets. The town of Millbrook Ford sat at the edge of the kingdom's western territory, where the farmland gave way to hills and the hills to mountains. It was not large enough to have forgotten the orc raids of 20 years past, but not small enough that everyone knew everyone's business. Orcs who came now came for work, for the hard labor humans would rather not do, and they lived in a cluster of cottages on the far side of the river where the bridge pylons needed constant repair from spring flooding. Finnegan had no particular love for orcs, but no particular hatred either. He had been a boy during the raids, safe in the eastern cities where his father had worked as a clerk. The war had been distant thunder, a thing of rumors and broadsheets. When he looked at the orc mother, he did not see an enemy. He saw exhaustion and pride, and a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of the way Margaret had held their daughter in those few precious hours before the midwife had taken the tiny blue body away. He picked up his broom, though the floor did not need sweeping. The next morning, he would time it better. The following day broke cold and clear, the first real bite of autumn in the air. Finnegan unlocked his shop before dawn and set about arranging the window display with more care than usual. He placed a small carved horse near the edge of the sill, close enough to the glass that a child pressed against the window would see every detail of its painted mane and delicate legs. Then he took his broom and waited. They came as the sun crested the rooflines, the orc mother holding both children's hands now because the boy had a tendency to wander. Finnegan stepped outside and began sweeping the already clean threshold, working slowly, methodically. He did not look up as they approached. He did not want to startle them. The little girl noticed him first. Her hand tightened in her mother's grip, and the mother's steps quickened just as they always did. But the boy was staring at the wooden horse, his small green face pressed close to the window glass. "Mama," the boy said, his voice high and sweet. "Look." "Bertrand, no," the mother said quietly, her accent thick but her words clear. "Come now." "But it is a horse, Mama, like the ones that pull the carts." Finnegan swept a little closer. He did not look at them directly, but he said, voice casual, "Fine morning." The orc mother froze. Her dark eyes flicked to him, wary as a deer's. She nodded once, a short sharp motion, and tugged her children forward. Finnegan watched them go, the boy looking back over his shoulder until they turned the corner. He swept the same spot 3 more times before going back inside. The next day he was outside again, sweeping. This time he had placed a small cloth doll beside the horse, a simple thing with button eyes and yellow yarn hair. The little girl saw it and her steps slowed despite her mother's pull. "Good morning," Finnegan said, addressing the air more than the orc woman. She nodded again, still wary, still hurrying. But her eyes had tracked to the doll for just a moment, and he had seen something soften in her face. On the 4th morning he spoke a little more. "Cold today. Winter will come early, I think." The orc mother paused. It was barely perceptible, just a half-second hesitation in her stride, but Finnegan noticed. Her daughter was staring at the doll with the kind of longing that could break a heart clean in two. "Yes," the orc woman said finally, her voice low and careful. "Early." It was a single word, but Finnegan felt as though he had won something precious. He nodded and went back to sweeping, and the woman pulled her children onward. That afternoon, when the shop was quiet and the autumn sun slanted through the windows, Finnegan sat at his workbench and carved. His hands remembered the motions from his apprenticeship, the way he had learned the trade from his uncle, before his father had insisted he pursue clerking instead. Margaret had encouraged him to take it up again after they married, and he had made her a dozen small figures in their 2 brief years together. Now he made a small wooden cat, no longer than his palm, and painted it with careful strokes until it looked ready to pounce. The next morning the cat sat on the windowsill beside the horse and the doll. Finnegan swept outside as the orc mother and her children approached. This time the boy spotted the cat immediately and let out a small gasp of delight. "Mama, a cat, a little cat." "Bertrand," the mother said, but there was less sharpness in her voice now. She glanced at Finnegan, and he met her eyes for the first time. She had a strong face, all clean lines and angles, and her eyes were the color of dark amber. She was not beautiful in the way Margaret had been beautiful, all soft curves and gentle smiles, but there was something compelling in her that made Finnegan want to keep looking. "Mister," the little girl said suddenly, her voice tiny and hopeful. "Is that your cat?" Finnegan paused in his sweeping. "The carved one. Yes, I made it. It is very pretty. Thank you." He crouched down a little, bringing himself closer to the child's height. "What is your name?" The girl looked up at her mother, who nodded fractionally. "Marisol," the girl whispered. "That is a lovely name. And your brother?" "Bertrand," the boy announced proudly, puffing out his small chest. "Fine names, both." Finnegan straightened and looked at the mother. "And yours, if I may ask?" The orc woman hesitated. She was clearly unaccustomed to humans addressing her as though she were a person deserving of courtesy. "Syrah," she said finally. "Syrah Whitestone. Finnegan Collier. I own this shop." He gestured toward the window. "I make toys, small things mostly, some for decoration, some for playing." Syrah's eyes flicked to the display, then quickly away. "They are beautiful, but we must go. I will be late." She pulled her children onward before Finnegan could respond, but this time Marisol waved back at him, a shy flutter of green fingers, and he found himself smiling for the first time in recent memory. Over the following week, Finnegan continued his slow campaign. He swept at the same time each morning, exchanged a few words with Syrah, and learned small pieces of her story. She had been widowed 3 years past when her husband had died in a logging accident in the northern forests. She had come south to Millbrook Ford because her cousin had promised her work, but the cousin had moved on before she arrived, and Syrah had been left to find employment where she could. The bakery paid little, but it was steady, and she took in mending at night to make ends meet. Finnegan learned that Marisol loved anything soft and gentle: birds, rabbits, the cat that sometimes sunned itself on the bakery's back step. Bertrand loved horses and carts, and anything that moved with purpose. Syrah herself said little about her own preferences, though Finnegan noticed that she always paused for just a heartbeat when she passed the wooden figures of animals he had begun carving with more frequency. He added new toys to the window display each week, always placing them where the children could see them clearly. A wooden rabbit for Marisol, a cart with wheels that actually turned for Bertrand. And slowly, gradually, Syrah began to linger a few moments longer each morning, her wariness easing by degrees. "You are kind to speak with us," she said one morning, the words careful and formal. "Most do not." Finnegan paused in his sweeping. "Most are fools, then." Syrah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Perhaps, or perhaps they remember the wars. The wars were 20 years ago. You would have been a child. I was 5 years old when the fighting ended. I remember very little of it." Syrah looked down at her children. "But they remember the humans. They see my face and they think I must have blood on my hands. Do you? I have never raised a weapon against anyone." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I want only to keep my children safe and fed. That is all." Finnegan nodded slowly. "That is all any of us want, I think." Syrah met his eyes then, and he saw surprise there, and something else he could not quite name. "You are a strange man, Finnegan Collier." "So I have been told." This time she did smile, a small, quick thing that made her tusks more visible and her eyes warmer. Then she gathered her children and continued toward the bakery, and Finnegan stood watching until they disappeared around the corner. That afternoon, he carved a small figure of a woman with a long braid down her back, and he placed it on his workbench where he could see it while he worked. He told himself it was merely practice, a way to improve his skill. He did not examine too closely why the figure's face had such strong, clean lines, or why he had carved her standing tall and proud rather than bent under the weight of burdens. The first frost came in mid-autumn, painting the shop windows with delicate patterns. Finnegan arrived early to light the fire in the small stove that heated the shop, and he was arranging kindling when he heard a commotion outside. He stepped to the door and saw Syrah standing in the street with her children pressed behind her. 3 boys, human and perhaps 15 years old, had surrounded them. The boys were laughing, their breath misting in the cold air, and one of them held a stick. "Monster," the boy with the stick was saying, his voice carrying clear across the quiet street. "Greenskin monster, go back to your hole." Syrah said nothing. She stood very still, her hands on her children's shoulders, her face carefully blank. But Finnegan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was clenched tight. He was moving before he fully decided to move, his long legs carrying him across the distance in a few strides. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. The boys turned, startled. The one with the stick lowered it slightly. "We are just having a bit of fun, sir." "I see no fun here. I see 3 nearly grown men threatening a woman and 2 small children." Finnegan positioned himself between Syrah and the boys, his height and breadth suddenly useful. "Go home. Now." "But she is. I know what she is, and I know what you are. Cowards who find courage only in numbers." Finnegan's voice was cold now, colder than he had heard it since Margaret's death. "Leave, before I speak to your fathers." The boys exchanged glances, their bravado deflating. The one with the stick dropped it, and they slouched away, muttering insults under their breath but not daring to repeat them loudly. Finnegan turned to find Syrah staring at him, her amber eyes wide. Marisol was crying silently, tears tracking down her green cheeks, and Bertrand looked furious, his small hands balled into fists. "Thank you," Syrah said quietly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Finnegan crouched down to Marisol's level. "Are you hurt, little one?" Marisol shook her head, hiccuping. Finnegan pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. She took it hesitantly and wiped her face. "They are mean," Bertrand announced, his voice shaking with anger and unshed tears. "They are always mean." "Some people are," Finnegan agreed. He looked up at Sierra. "Does this happen often?" Sierra's face was carefully neutral again. "Often enough, we manage. You should not have to." Finnegan straightened. "Come inside. Let them warm up for a moment before you go on." Sierra hesitated, clearly torn between pride and practicality. The children were shivering, and the sky was threatening snow. "Just for a moment," she said finally. Inside the shop, Finnegan stirred the fire higher and pulled 2 small stools close to the stove. Marisol and Bertrand sat huddled together, their eyes enormous as they took in the shelves of toys surrounding them. Sierra stood stiffly near the door, her hands clasped in front of her. "I have tea," Finnegan offered. "It is nothing fancy, but it is hot." "You have done enough," Sierra said, but her voice was softer now, less guarded. "It is only tea." Finnegan filled his kettle from the water bucket and set it on the stove. While it heated, he moved to his workbench and picked up the small wooden cat he had been finishing. "Bertrand, would you do me a favor?" The boy looked up, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. "What favor?" "I need someone to test this cat, to make sure it is sturdy enough for children to play with. Would you be willing to help?" Bertrand's eyes went enormous. "Test it?" "Yes." "Play with it for a while. See if it breaks or if the paint chips off. I need to know if my toys are well made." Finnegan held out the cat, and after a moment's hesitation, Bertrand reached out and took it with both hands. "But I do not have coin to pay," Bertrand said seriously. "You would be doing me a service. Testing toys is important work." Finnegan turned to Marisol. "And I have a rabbit that needs testing too, if you are interested." Marisol looked at her mother, who was watching Finnegan with an unreadable expression. Sierra nodded slowly, and Marisol whispered, "Yes, please." Finnegan retrieved the wooden rabbit from the shelf and placed it in Marisol's hands. She held it as though it were made of glass, her small fingers tracing the carved ears and the cotton tail he had glued in place. The kettle whistled and Finnegan poured tea into 2 chipped cups, handing one to Sierra. She took it and sipped cautiously, and some of the tension finally eased from her shoulders. "Why are you kind to us?" she asked quietly, her eyes on her children rather than on Finnegan. "You do not know us." "We are nothing to you." Finnegan considered the question. He could have given her easy answers, platitudes about common decency or treating all people fairly. Instead, he found himself speaking truth. "My wife died 2 years ago. We had a daughter for half a day before she died, too." "I think," he paused, searching for words. "I think I forgot how to see the living for a while. I was too busy looking backward. But your children remind me that life continues, that there is still joy to be found in small things." Sierra looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw understanding in her face. "I am sorry for your loss. That is a heavy grief to carry. As is yours." He sipped his own tea. "You are doing well by them, your children. They are loved. That matters more than anything." Sierra's jaw tightened and she looked away quickly, but not before Finnegan saw the shine of tears in her eyes. They drank their tea in silence while Marisol and Bertrand played quietly by the fire, their initial shyness forgotten as they made the cat chase the rabbit across the floorboards. When Sierra finally gathered her children to leave, she hesitated at the door. "The toys," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "When you are satisfied with the testing, oh, that will take weeks," Finnegan said easily. "Perhaps months. Toys must be thoroughly evaluated. They can take them home, test them in different conditions." Sierra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she was almost smiling. "You are a terrible liar, Finnegan Collier." Then it is fortunate I make toys instead of running a card game. He opened the door for her. Same time tomorrow. We will see, Sira said, but he could hear the warmth in her voice now, the guard finally coming down a fraction. Thank you for everything. After they left, Finnegan stood at the window watching them walk toward the bakery. Bertrand clutched the wooden cat against his chest, and Marisol held her mother's hand with one hand and the rabbit with the other. They did not hurry past his shop this time. Marisol turned and waved, and Finnegan waved back. He returned to his workbench and picked up the figure of the woman with the long braid. He had more work to do on her face, on capturing the fierce pride he saw in Sira's expression. He settled onto his stool and began to carve, and for the first time since Margaret's death, the shop did not feel quite so empty. The days shortened as autumn deepened toward winter, and the morning meetings between Finnegan and Sira became routine. She stopped hurrying past his shop, and sometimes she lingered for several minutes, talking with him while the children pressed their noses to the window glass. They spoke of small things, the weather, the price of bread, the way the river was running higher than usual. But underneath the ordinary words, Finnegan felt something growing, a connection that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the way Sira smiled when he told a joke, or the way his heart lifted when he heard her voice. He was falling in love with her, he realized one morning as he watched her laugh at something Bertrand had said. It was not the sudden, overwhelming passion he had felt for Margaret when they were both 18 and foolish. This was quieter, steadier, like a fire that burns low but never goes out. He loved the way Sira moved through the world with such determination, such fierce protectiveness for her children. He loved her dry humor and her pride, and the way her guard dropped a little more each day when she was near him. The realization should have frightened him. Instead, it felt right, like a door opening in a house that had been locked too long. Winter's first snow came on a market day, and Millbrook Ford's main square filled with farmers and craftspeople selling their goods before the roads became impassable. Finnegan set up a small table outside his shop, displaying wooden toys and hoping to catch the eye of parents looking for festival gifts. Trade was slow but steady, and he was wrapping a set of carved animals for a farmer's wife when he heard raised voices from across the square. He looked up to see Sira standing very still beside a vegetable stall, Marisol and Bertrand pressed against her sides. A man Finnegan recognized as Gareth Moss, who owned the general store 2 streets over, was speaking loudly enough for half the market to hear. "Thieving greenskin," Moss was saying, his face red with anger or cold. "I should have known better than to let your kind in my shop. I was missing coins after you left, and a whole box of needles gone from the counter." Sira's face was carefully blank, but Finnegan could see her hands shaking. "I took nothing. I purchased thread and I left, that is all. Liar. Orc liar." Moss turned to address the gathering crowd. "She came in this morning, looked around while I was helping another customer. When I checked my till afterward, I was short 3 silver. And the needles I had just set out were gone. I did not take them." Sira's voice was steady, but Finnegan heard the fear underneath. "Search me if you wish, search my children, you will find nothing. Oh, you are clever, you hid them somewhere, passed them to an accomplice." Moss folded his arms. "I want the constable called, I want her arrested." The crowd was murmuring now, some faces sympathetic but most hard with suspicion. Finnegan abandoned his table and pushed through the press of bodies until he stood beside Sira. She looked at him with desperate eyes, and he saw that she was terrified not for herself but for her children. "What evidence do you have?" Finnegan asked Moss, keeping his voice level. "I told you. Missing coins, missing needles. She was in my shop. Were there other customers?" "Well, yes, But then how do you know she took anything? Any of them could have. Moss's face reddened further. They were humans, respectable people, not greenskin trash. The word hung in the cold air like a curse. Finnegan felt anger bloom hot in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. So you have no evidence, just suspicion based on her race. That is evidence enough. Moss turned to the crowd again. We all know what orcs are, thieves and savages. We let them into our town, and this is what happens. They steal from honest folk. She stole nothing. Finnegan stepped forward, putting himself between Moss and Sierra. I know this woman. She is honest and hardworking. She would not take so much as a bent pin without paying for it. And how would you know? You have been taken in by her, Collier. Everyone has seen you mooning over the greenskin, making eyes at her like a fool. Moss sneered. She has probably been stealing from you too, and you are too besotted to notice. The crowd laughed, and Finnegan felt heat rise in his face. But before he could respond, a new voice cut through the noise. Perhaps you should check your own accounts, Moss, before you accuse others of theft. Finnegan turned to see Adeline Porter, who ran the apothecary, pushing through the crowd. She was a thin woman of perhaps 50 years, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. What are you talking about? Moss demanded. I am talking about the fact that I have noticed discrepancies in your prices for months now. You charge different amounts for the same goods depending on who is buying, and last week you shortchanged my daughter by 2 coppers when she purchased flour. When she pointed it out, you claimed she had miscounted. Adeline's voice was crisp and clear. Perhaps your missing coins are simply coins you forgot you cheated out of someone else, Moss sputtered. That is slander. I run an honest business. As honest as your accusations against this woman. Adeline turned to Sierra. Did you take anything from his shop? No, madam, I swear it. I believe you. Adeline looked around at the crowd. Moss has been looking for an excuse to drive the orc families out of Millbrook Ford since they arrived. He complains to anyone who will listen that they are taking work from humans. This is simply his latest attempt to stir up trouble. Several people in the crowd nodded, and Finnegan saw the mood shifting. Moss's face was nearly purple now. You are all fools if you believe an orc over an honest merchant. She is lying, I tell you. Then prove it, Finnegan said quietly. Prove she took your coins and needles. Show us evidence. Otherwise, admit you made a false accusation and apologize. Moss looked around at the crowd, at the skeptical faces and folded arms. He looked at Adeline Porter's cold stare, and at Finnegan standing protective beside Sierra. Finally, he spat in the snow at Sierra's feet. Keep your thieving greenskin. But mark my words, Collier, she will rob you blind before she is done with you. He turned and stalked away, and the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. Finnegan turned to Sierra and found her staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Thank you, she said quietly. Both of you. She nodded to Adeline, who nodded back. He is a bully and a cheat, Adeline said briskly. Do not let him trouble you, though I would advise staying out of his shop in the future. I will. Sierra's hands were still shaking. Marisol was crying silently against her side, and Bertrand looked as though he wanted to hit something. Finnegan crouched down to the children's eye level. That was frightening. Are you both all right? Marisol shook her head. Bertrand nodded fiercely. Finnegan looked up at Sierra. Come back to the shop, let them warm up. I have already taken too much of your time, too much of your kindness. Sierra's voice was tight. You stood up for me in front of the whole market. You will lose customers because of this. Then they are not customers I want. Finnegan straightened. Please, come back to the shop. Sierra studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her weighing pride against her children's needs. Finally, she nodded. For a short while. They walked back through the thinning crowd, and Finnegan noticed the looks they received. Some curious, some disapproving, some speculative. He had made his allegiances clear today, and there would be consequences. But when he looked down at Bertrand's tear-streaked face and felt the weight of Sierra's gratitude, he found he did not care. Inside the shop, he built up the fire while Sierra settled the children near the warmth. He made tea and produced a tin of cookies his neighbor had brought by the previous week. Marisol nibbled hers cautiously, while Bertrand devoured his in 3 bites. Sierra sat on a stool near the workbench, her tea growing cold in her hands. "He will not stop," she said quietly. "Moss, men like him never stop. They will find ways to make our lives harder until we are forced to leave. Let him try." Finnegan leaned against the workbench. "You have done nothing wrong. You have every right to be here. Rights mean little when no one will defend them." Sierra looked down at her tea. "You should not have stood up for me. You will lose business because of it." "I stood up for what was right. That is all." "Is it?" Sierra met his eyes, and there was something fierce and searching in her gaze. "Or did you stand up for me because—" She stopped, shook her head. "Forgive me, I should not pry." Finnegan moved closer, drawn by something he could not name. "Because what?" "Because of how you look at me. The way I have seen you looking at me for weeks now." Sierra's voice was very quiet. "Like I am not a monster, like I am a woman." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Finnegan knew he should deny it, laugh it off, retreat to safe ground. Instead, he found himself speaking truth again. "You are a woman. A remarkable woman who is raising 2 children alone and surviving against odds that would break most people. Why would I not look at you with admiration?" Admiration. Sierra said the word like she was tasting it, testing its weight. "Is that what it is?" Among other things. Finnegan's heart was hammering now. "Sierra." Bertrand chose that moment to knock over his cup, sending cold tea splashing across the floor. The spell broke, and Sierra was on her feet immediately, pulling a rag from her bag to mop up the spill. Finnegan helped her, their hands brushing as they worked, and the touch sent a jolt through him like static spark. When the floor was dry again, Sierra gathered her children quickly, her movements sharp with some emotion Finnegan could not read. "We must go. Thank you for the tea, for everything." "Sierra, please." She was not looking at him now. "I cannot, this is not—" She stopped, took a breath. "You are a kind man, Finnegan Collier, but kindness is not always enough." She left before he could respond, herding her children out into the snow. Finnegan stood at the window and watched them disappear around the corner, and he felt as though he had lost something precious before he even had a chance to hold it. The following morning, Sierra did not pass by the shop, nor the morning after that. Finnegan swept his threshold and waited, but the street remained empty of the small green family he had grown to expect. He told himself she had changed her route to work, or that she was avoiding the market after the incident with Moss. But as the days stretched on, he began to fear he had driven her away with his unspoken feelings, with the weight of expectations she did not want to carry. On the 5th day, he closed the shop early and walked to the bakery. The owner, a round man named Thomas Walsh, looked surprised to see him. "Help you, Collier?" Walsh asked, wiping flour from his hands. "I was wondering about Sierra Whitestone, the orc woman who works for you. Is she well?" Walsh's expression shuddered. "She does not work here anymore." Finnegan felt his stomach drop. "What? I let her go 3 days past." After that business in the market with Moss, several customers made it clear they were not comfortable with an orc handling their bread. Walsh looked uncomfortable but defiant. "It is my business, Collier. I cannot afford to lose customers over this. She did nothing wrong. Maybe not. But perception matters in business, as you will learn soon enough if you keep defending her." Walsh turned away. "I gave her 2 weeks' pay as severance. That is more than I owed her. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." Finnegan left the bakery with rage singing through his veins. He walked quickly through the snowy streets toward the river, toward the cluster of cottages where the Orc families lived. He had never been to this part of town, but he had heard enough descriptions to find his way. The cottages were small and poorly maintained, with patched roofs and gaps in the walls that must let in terrible drafts. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and he could hear children playing somewhere out of sight. He asked an Orc man chopping wood which cottage belonged to Sira Whitestone, and the man pointed with his axe toward a structure at the end of the row. Finnegan knocked on the rough wooden door and waited. After a moment, Sira opened it. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her braid coming loose. When she saw Finnegan, her expression flickered through surprise, hope, and resignation before settling on careful neutrality. "Mr. Collier, what are you doing here? I heard you lost your position at the bakery." "I came to see if you were all right." Sira's jaw tightened. "We are managing. Thank you for your concern. Sira, please let me help." "How?" The word came out sharp. "How can you help? Walsh was right. After what happened in the market, no one will hire me. I have been to every shop and farm within walking distance. They all say no." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have enough put aside to pay rent for another month. After that, I do not know what we will do. Come work for me." The words were out before Finnegan fully thought them through, but once spoken, he realized they made perfect sense. Sira stared at him as though he had suggested flying to the moon. "Work for you? Doing what?" "You do mending," you said. "Fine handwork. I have seen you sewing patches on Bertrand's coat." Finnegan spoke quickly, the ideas tumbling over each other. "Some of my toys need cloth elements. Doll clothes, soft animals, fabric details, and someone with good hands could help with the finishing work on the wooden pieces. Sanding, painting. I know nothing about making toys. I could teach you. You are clever and your hands are steady. You would learn quickly." He met her eyes. "The pay would not be much, but it would be steady. And the children could come with you. They could play in the shop where it is warm." Sira looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working behind her eyes. "People would talk. They are already talking after the market. If I work for you in your shop where everyone can see, they will say terrible things. Let them say what they like. It will ruin your business, Sira." Finnegan stepped closer, his voice gentle. "My business is already suffering because I made it clear whose side I am on. A few customers have stopped coming. Others make pointed comments about proper boundaries and knowing one's place. I am losing nothing I value by offering you work, and I am gaining," he paused, searching for words. "I am gaining the company of someone I have come to care for, and her children, who make my shop feel like a home instead of a monument to the dead." Sira's eyes were bright with tears. "You barely know me. You should not risk so much for someone you barely know." "I know enough. I know you are brave and stubborn and fiercely loving. I know you make me want to be better than I have been. I know that when you smile, truly smile, my heart feels lighter than it has in 2 years." Finnegan took a shaky breath. "That is enough for me. Is it enough for you?" For a long moment, Sira simply looked at him. Then she reached out and took his hand, her green fingers wrapping around his pale ones. Her skin was warm and calloused from hard work, and her grip was strong. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is enough." Sira started working in the toy shop the following Monday, arriving at dawn with Marisol and Bertrand in tow. Finnegan showed her how to sand the rough edges from carved pieces, how to mix paints to get the right shades, how to stuff and stitch soft animals so the seams were invisible. She learned quickly, her hands deft and sure, and soon she was producing work that matched his own in quality. The children played quietly on a rug Finnegan had laid out near the fire, building elaborate stories with the wooden animals and cloth dolls. Sometimes, Marisol helped her mother with simple tasks, carefully painting spots on wooden dogs or sorting buttons for doll clothes. Bertrand preferred to stay in his imaginary worlds, making the toys talk to each other in different voices, and Finnegan found himself laughing at the elaborate adventures the boy invented. Customers noticed the change immediately. Some made disapproving comments or asked pointed questions about Finnegan's new employee. Others simply stopped coming. But a few those with kind hearts or open minds greeted Syrah politely and admired her handiwork. Adeline Porter from the apothecary became a regular visitor, often bringing herbs for tea and staying to chat while she looked through the toy selection. "You have given the gossips something to chew on," Adeline said one afternoon, her eyes twinkling. "They are placing bets on how long before you propose to her." Finnegan nearly dropped the horse he was carving. "That is ridiculous. She is my employee." "She is more than that, and you know it. The way you look at her when she is not watching, the way she smiles when you make a joke." "The whole town can see it, Collier." Adeline selected a small wooden fox and turned it over in her hands. "For what it is worth, I think you are good for each other. Margaret would have liked her." The mention of his late wife should have stung, but instead it felt like a blessing. "You think so?" "Margaret had a generous heart. She would have wanted you to be happy again." Adeline paid for the fox and patted Finnegan's arm. "Do not let the small minds of this town dictate your life. You have already lost too much time to grief." After she left, Finnegan looked across the shop to where Syrah was teaching Marisol how to embroider tiny flowers on a doll's dress. The winter sunlight slanted through the window and caught in Syrah's black hair, turning it blue at the edges. She was laughing at something Marisol had said, her tusks showing white against her green skin, and Finnegan felt his heart turn over in his chest. He loved her. Not as he had loved Margaret, but in a different way that was no less real. He loved her quiet strength and her sharp humor, and the way she mothered her children with such fierce devotion. He loved the way she hummed while she worked, and the way her eyes lit up when she completed a particularly difficult piece. He loved that she argued with him when she thought he was wrong, and that she accepted his help without letting it diminish her pride. The question was whether she could love him in return. Whether an orc woman and a human man could build something real together in a world that would despise them for trying. The answer came sooner than he expected, delivered by Gareth Moss in the form of malicious lies. It started as a whisper, growing louder over the course of a week until it became the talk of Millbrook Ford. The orc woman working at Collier's toy shop was a thief. She was stealing from him, taking coins from the till and pocketing supplies. Moss was telling everyone who would listen that he had been right all along, that orcs could not be trusted, and that Finnegan Collier was a fool who was being robbed blind by the greenskin he had taken pity on. Finnegan heard the rumors and dismissed them as the petty revenge of a small man. But the damage was done. Customers stopped coming entirely, even the kind ones. Parents did not want their children playing with toys made by orc hands. The shop, which had been struggling but surviving, began to feel like a tomb again. Syrah heard the rumors too, and she came to Finnegan one evening after the children were asleep in the back room, her face drawn and pale. "I should leave," she said without preamble. "This is destroying you, your business, your reputation, all because of me." "The rumors are lies and everyone knows it, do they? Or do they want to believe the worst because it confirms what they already think about my people?" Syrah wrapped her arms around herself. "I cannot stay and watch you lose everything. I will not. Where will you go?" "You have no money, no prospects." Finnegan stood and moved toward her. "Syrah, please do not let Moss win. He has already won. Look around, Finnegan. Your shop is empty. You are making nothing because no one will buy from you anymore. Her voice broke. I am poison to you. I am poison to anyone who tries to help me. You are not poison. You are the best thing that has happened to me in 2 years. Finnegan reached for her hands, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take them. I do not care about the shop. I can make toys anywhere. I care about you. About Marisol and Bertrand. About having a reason to wake up in the morning. You cannot mean that. I do mean it. I love you, Sierra Whitestone. I love your strength and your pride and your fierce heart. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you challenge me when you think I am wrong. I love watching you teach your children to be kind in a world that is cruel to them. He squeezed her hands gently. I know the timing is terrible. I know we have known each other for barely 3 months, but I am tired of wasting time being careful. Life is too short and too uncertain. So I am telling you plainly, I love you. Sierra was crying now, tears tracking down her green cheeks. You are a fool, Finnegan Collier. Perhaps, but I am your fool if you will have me. She laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob. I love you too. I have loved you since the day you stood between me and those boys with the stick. I love your kindness and your steady hands and the way you make my children feel safe. I love that you see me as a woman, not a monster. She pulled one hand free and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his cheek. But love is not enough, not in a world that will hate us for loving. Then we will change the world, or at least our small corner of it. Finnegan turned his head and kissed her palm. Stay with me. Help me prove that Moss is lying. We will find a way through this. Sierra searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. How do we prove it? How do we fight lies when everyone is ready to believe them, with truth, with numbers? Finnegan's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together a plan. I keep ledgers. Every sale, every supply purchase, every penny that comes in or goes out. If Moss is claiming you are stealing, my books will show whether that is true or not. And if people do not believe your books, if they say you are lying to protect me, then we get someone else to verify them. Someone whose word no one can question. Finnegan thought of Adeline Porter with her sharp mind and sharper tongue. Adeline worked as a clerk before she opened her apothecary. She knows how to read accounts. If she says my books are accurate, people will believe her. Sierra's eyes brightened with the first spark of hope he had seen in days. That could work. It will work. And we will do it publicly in the market where everyone can see and hear. We will make Moss answer for his lies. They spent the rest of the evening going over Finnegan's ledgers, carefully checking each entry. The books were meticulous, every transaction recorded with date and amount. There were no discrepancies, no missing coins, no evidence of any theft. When Adeline came by the next day, Finnegan showed her the ledgers and explained the situation. Adeline's eyes went hard and cold as she read through the entries. Moss is claiming she has been stealing for weeks now. If that were true, you should be missing a significant amount of money. Exactly, but I am not. Every penny is accounted for. Then we need to expose him. Adeline closed the ledger with a decisive snap. The winter market is next week. Everyone will be there. We will make Moss repeat his accusations in public, and then we will show that he is lying. The plan was simple but risky. Finnegan would set up his table at the winter market as usual. When Moss inevitably made some comment about thieving orcs, Finnegan would challenge him to provide evidence. Adeline would examine the ledgers publicly, verifying that no money was missing. And Sierra would stand beside him, dignified and proud, and let the truth speak for itself. The night before the market, Finnegan barely slept. Sierra stayed late at the shop, both of them working by candlelight to finish the toys they would sell. Marisol and Bertrand had been sent to stay with Sierra's neighbor, a kind orc woman named Thola who had children of her own. It was just the two of them in the quiet shop, their hands moving steadily, and the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. "Are you frightened?" Sierra asked finally, her voice quiet. "Terrified," Finnegan admitted, "but also hopeful. We have truth on our side. That has to count for something. In my experience, truth matters less than people want it to." Sierra set down the doll she was finishing and looked at him. "But I am grateful you are willing to fight for it anyway, for me. Always." Finnegan reached across the workbench and took her hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." Sierra nodded and they returned to their work. But their hands remained joined between them, and Finnegan drew strength from the simple contact. The winter market was crowded and cold, the morning air sharp enough to bite. Finnegan set up his table with Sierra beside him, arranging wooden animals and cloth dolls in neat rows. People stared as they passed, some curious, some disapproving, some openly hostile. Finnegan ignored them all and focused on greeting the few customers brave enough to approach. Adeline arrived mid-morning, carrying a basket and wearing an expression that suggested she was spoiling for a fight. She browsed Finnegan's table leisurely, asking loud questions about craftsmanship and complimenting Sierra's needlework in a voice that carried across the square. Gareth Moss appeared shortly after, his face red from cold or anger. He stopped in front of Finnegan's table and looked pointedly at Sierra. "Still keeping the greenskin around, Collier? How much has she stolen from you this week?" The conversations around them quieted, people turning to listen. Finnegan kept his voice calm and clear. "She has stolen nothing. My accounts are balanced to the penny." "Your accounts?" Moss laughed, a harsh sound. "You would say anything to protect her. You are besotted with the creature. Everyone knows it. If I am so besotted, surely I am too foolish to keep accurate records. Would you like to examine my ledgers yourself and show everyone where the discrepancies are?" Finnegan pulled the books from beneath his table and held them out. "Go ahead. Find the missing money you claim she has taken." Moss hesitated, his eyes darting around at the gathering crowd. "I do not need to look at your books. I know what I know. What you know is lies." Adeline stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I have examined Mr. Collier's ledgers personally. Every entry is recorded and accurate. There is no missing money, no theft, nothing but honest trade and careful accounting." She fixed Moss with a glare that could cut glass. "So either admit you were wrong or provide evidence for your accusations. Otherwise, you are the only thief here. A thief of reputation, and that is the worst kind." The crowd murmured, and Finnegan saw several people nodding. Moss's face went from red to purple. "You are calling me a liar." "I am calling you a man who makes accusations he cannot prove and spreads malicious gossip to hurt people who have done nothing to him." Adeline crossed her arms. "Why do you hate the orc families so much, Moss? What have they ever done to you? They are taking our jobs, our resources. They are monsters who should go back where they came from." Moss turned to the crowd. "The war may be over, but they are still our enemies. We let them in, and this is how they repay us, with theft and lies, and the only liar here is you." Sierra's voice rang out clear and strong. She stepped forward, and Finnegan saw that she was trembling, but her head was high. "You want us gone because you are afraid that we will work harder than you, that we will be better than you at the jobs you think belong only to humans. You tried to drive me away by accusing me of theft, and when that failed, you spread lies about me stealing from Finnegan. But we have proof that you are lying. We have ledgers and witnesses and the truth." She turned to address the crowd, and Finnegan had never been more proud of anyone in his life. "I am not a thief. I am a mother who works hard to feed her children and keep them safe. I am a woman who came to this town hoping for a chance at a better life. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, then I do not know what else to say. But I will not let the lies of a bitter man destroy the life I am trying to build. The silence that followed was absolute. Finnegan could hear the wind moving through the market stalls, the stamp of a horse's hoof on frozen ground. Then someone in the crowd began to clap. It was a farmer Finnegan recognized, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Others joined in, slowly at first and then with more conviction, until half the market was applauding. Moss looked around wildly, his bluster deflating like a punctured bladder. "You are all fools. She has bewitched you somehow, made you believe. The only one doing any bewitching here is you, Moss, with your poisonous tongue." Adeline's voice was cold. "I suggest you leave before someone decides to examine your accounts and see how honest your business practices really are." Moss opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and shoved his way through the crowd. People moved aside to let him pass, and several made rude gestures behind his back. When he was gone, the tension broke and the market came back to life, conversations resuming and trade continuing. Finnegan turned to Sierra and found her staring at him with wide eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it. You did it. That speech was remarkable." He reached for her hand, not caring who saw. "You are remarkable." Sierra's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you. For believing in me. For standing beside me." "Always," Finnegan said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The rest of the market day was a blur of sales and conversations. People came to Finnegan's table who had never shopped there before, curious to meet the orc woman who had stood up to Moss, wanting to examine the toys made by her hands. Finnegan sold more that day than he had in the entire previous month, and by the time the sun began to set, his table was nearly empty. As they packed up, Adeline stopped by with a satisfied smile. "Well done, both of you. Moss will think twice before spreading lies again." "I hope so." Sierra finished wrapping the last few unsold toys. "Thank you for your help. We could not have done this without you." "Nonsense. You had truth on your side. I simply helped people see it." Adeline glanced between them, her eyes shrewd. "So what happens now? Will you continue as employer and employee, or will you admit what everyone already knows?" Finnegan felt his face heat. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You love her and she loves you. The whole town saw it today when you stood together. The question is what you intend to do about it." Sierra was studiously examining a wooden horse, her face carefully neutral. Finnegan took a deep breath. "Sierra, would you like to have dinner with me? Tonight after we close the shop. A proper dinner, just the two of us, where we can talk about," he gestured vaguely, "about everything." Sierra looked up, her amber eyes warm. "I would like that very much. But the children, I will watch them," Adeline said immediately. "Bring them to my house. They can play with my grandchildren." "You have grandchildren?" Finnegan had never heard her mention family. "Two of them, visiting from the next town over. They will be delighted to meet Marisol and Bertrand. I will feed them supper and keep them entertained until you come to collect them." Adeline smiled. "Consider it my contribution to the cause of true love." That evening, after dropping the children at Adeline's house and enduring Bertrand's excited questions about why Mama was having dinner with Mr. Collier, Finnegan and Sierra walked back to the toy shop through the snowy streets. The shop was dark and quiet, and Finnegan lit candles while Sierra stood awkwardly near the door. "I am not much of a cook," Finnegan admitted, pulling out the bread and cheese and cold meat he had prepared earlier. "But I can make a decent meal if you are not too particular." "Finnegan." Sierra's voice stopped him. "You do not have to feed me, I just want to talk." He set down the food and moved to stand in front of her. "Then let us talk. About what happened today, about what Adeline said, about what comes next for us." Sierra looked up at him, and he could see the fear and hope warring in her face. "What do you want to come next? I want you to stay. Not just as my employee, but as," Finnegan struggled for words, "as my partner, in work and in life. I want to watch your children grow up. I want to make toys beside you and argue with you about paint colors and fall asleep knowing you will be there in the morning." He took her hands. "I want to marry you, Sierra Whitestone, if you will have me." Sierra's breath caught. "Marry? Finnegan, that is, people will never accept it. An orc and a human, married, they will make our lives hell. Let them try. After today, after watching you stand up to Moss and speak your truth, I know that we can face anything together." He squeezed her hands. "I am not saying it will be easy, but I am saying it will be worth it. You are worth it. I have children. You would be taking on not just me, but Marisol and Bertrand. They are part of any future I have. I know. I want them too. I want to teach Bertrand how to carve and help Marisol with her reading. I want to be the father they lost if they will let me." Finnegan's voice was rough with emotion. "I want a family again, Sierra. I want the noise and chaos and love. I want to stop living in the past and start building a future." Sierra was crying now, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "I want that too. I want it so much it terrifies me. But what if you wake up one day and regret it? What if people make it so hard that you wish you had never met me? Then I will tell them the same thing I am telling you now. I love you. I choose you. Every day for the rest of my life I choose you." He pulled her closer until their foreheads touched. "Say yes, Sierra. Please say yes." For a long moment she was silent. Then she whispered, "Yes. Yes, I will marry you, you foolish, wonderful man." Finnegan kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that tasted of salt from her tears and hope from both their hearts. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, and the future that had seemed so uncertain suddenly felt bright with possibility. They ate their simple dinner by candlelight, talking about logistics and dreams in equal measure. They would marry in the spring, Finnegan decided, when the world was green and new. They would live above the shop, which had 2 rooms that could be converted into bedrooms for the children. Sierra would continue making toys and perhaps start taking on mending work again, building her own small trade. They would face the disapproval of the town together, and slowly, patiently, they would prove that love could bridge any divide. When they collected the children from Adeline's house later that evening, Bertrand demanded to know what they had been doing. "Talking," Finnegan said, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Just talking." "For the whole time?" Bertrand sounded disappointed. "Very important talking." Sierra's smile was radiant. "We have something to tell you both, but it can wait until we get home." Marisol looked between them with wide, curious eyes. "Are you happy, Mama?" "Very happy, little one." "Then I am happy too," Marisol announced, and she took Finnegan's hand as they walked back through the snowy streets. The wedding took place in early spring, in the small clearing beside the river where orc families gathered for celebrations. Finnegan had suggested the church in town, but Sierra had gently pointed out that having an orc wedding in a human church would cause more disruption than it was worth. The clearing was beautiful in its own right, with new grass pushing up through the last patches of snow and early wildflowers dotting the banks. Adeline served as their witness, along with Sierra's neighbor Thola. A handful of other guests attended, mostly orcs from the river cottages, but also a few humans brave enough to show their support. Finnegan wore his best coat, the one Margaret had made for him years ago and which he had carefully mended. Sierra wore a dress of deep blue that Thola had sewn for her, with white flowers woven into her braid. They spoke their vows simply, promising to love and honor each other through whatever hardships came. Marisol stood beside her mother and cried happy tears. Bertrand stood beside Finnegan and tried very hard to look solemn and grown up. When the ceremony was finished and Finnegan kissed his new wife, the small gathering cheered. The reception was modest, just food and drink shared among friends, but Finnegan thought it was perfect. He watched Sira laugh with Thola and saw Marisol and Bertrand racing through the clearing with the other orc children, and he felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before Margaret's death. This was different from his first marriage, but no less real. This was a love built on mutual respect and shared struggle, on choosing each other every day despite the world's disapproval. As the sun began to set, and the guests drifted away, Sira came to stand beside him. She took his hand and they watched their children play, and Finnegan felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. "No regrets?" Sira asked quietly. "None. You, not a single one." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for choosing us, for choosing me." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Finnegan said, and he meant it. The months that followed were not without challenges. Some people in Millbrook Ford still muttered about the human who had married an orc, and there were occasions when Finnegan lost business because of his choice. But there were also moments of grace. Children who came to the shop to play with Marisol and Bertrand, their parents cautiously accepting that the orc children were no different from their own. Customers who admired Sira's handiwork and commissioned special pieces. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to accept the unusual family. Finnegan taught Bertrand to carve that summer, showing him how to hold the knife safely and how to see the shape hidden in the wood. The boy had a natural talent, and Finnegan found himself looking forward to their lessons, to the focused silence broken only by Bertrand's questions and observations. Marisol learned to paint, developing a delicate touch that made the wooden animals come alive with personality. Sira continued to work beside Finnegan, and together they created toys that were both beautiful and sturdy enough to withstand years of play. In the autumn, nearly a year after Finnegan had first noticed Sira hurrying past his shop, he and Sira took the children to the autumn fair that came through Millbrook Ford each year. It was a small affair compared to the great fairs in the cities, but it had rides and games and enough excitement to make Bertrand vibrate with anticipation. They walked through the fair together, a strange little family that drew stares but also smiles. Finnegan bought roasted chestnuts for everyone, and they sat on a bench watching the other children play. Marisol had made friends with a human girl her age, and the two of them were giggling over some shared joke. Bertrand was showing a human boy his toy horse, explaining solemnly how he had helped paint it. "They are going to be all right," Sira said quietly, watching her children. "They will grow up in a world that is kinder than the one we knew." "We will make sure of it," Finnegan agreed. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "One toy at a time, one child at a time, one day at a time." Sira smiled and kissed him, right there in front of the whole fair, and Finnegan kissed her back without shame or hesitation. When they pulled apart, he saw Adeline watching them from a nearby stall, grinning with satisfaction. He waved at her and she waved back, then turned to help a customer. As the sun set and the fair lights began to glow in the gathering dusk, Finnegan realized that this was the moment he had been working toward since that first morning, when he had seen an orc mother hurrying past his shop window. This was the life Margaret had wanted for him, the life he had thought he could never have again. A family, love, purpose. They stayed at the fair until Marisol fell asleep against Sira's shoulder and Bertrand started yawning between sentences. Then they walked home through the quiet streets, Finnegan carrying Bertrand while Sira held Marisol, and the town that had once seemed so hostile now felt like a place where they belonged. That night, After the children were tucked into their beds and the shop was dark and quiet, Finnegan and Sierra stood at the window looking out at the street where they had first met. Sierra was planning the toys she would make for the winter festival, and Finnegan was thinking about adding another room to their living quarters. "I love you," Sierra said suddenly, turning to face him. "I do not think I say it enough, but I do. I love you completely. I love you too." Finnegan pulled her into his arms. Every day, more than the day before. They stood there for a while, holding each other in the darkness, and Finnegan thought about how much had changed in 1 year. How an act of simple kindness, slowing down, speaking gently, offering toys as tests rather than charity, had led to this. To love and family, and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. 2 years later, in the early spring when the world was turning green again, Sierra gave birth to a daughter. They named her Willa, and she had her mother's green skin and her father's blue eyes, and a will that made itself known from the moment she entered the world. Finnegan held her for the first time and felt his heart expand to make room for this new love, this tiny person who represented everything they had built together. Marisol and Bertrand were entranced by their new sister, hovering around her cradle and fighting gently over who got to hold her next. Sierra watched them with tired, happy eyes, and Finnegan knew without being told that this was the family she had dreamed of, the life she had hoped for when she had first walked past his shop window all those months ago. The shop continued to thrive in its modest way, never making them wealthy but providing enough to live comfortably. Sierra's reputation as a craftswoman grew, and people began coming from neighboring towns to commission her work. Finnegan taught more children to carve, and several showed real talent. Slowly, quietly, they were changing their corner of the world, proving that humans and orcs could work together, live together, love together. When Willa was 6 months old, a letter arrived from the capital. It was addressed to Finnegan and Sierra both, written in elegant script on expensive paper. Finnegan opened it carefully while Sierra watched over his shoulder, Willa sleeping in her arms. The letter was from a consortium of craftspeople in the capital, inviting them to submit their work for inclusion in the kingdom's annual exposition. It was a prestigious event, the letter explained, showcasing the finest crafts from across the land. They had heard about the toy shop in Millbrook Ford where human and orc worked together, and they were interested in seeing what such a partnership could create. Sierra looked up at Finnegan with shining eyes. "They want our work, in the capital exposition." "They want our work," Finnegan repeated, still absorbing the information. "This could change everything. If people at the capital see what we can do, then maybe other humans and orcs will see that partnerships are possible, that we do not have to live apart." Sierra shifted Willa to her other shoulder. "We have to do it. We have to try." They spent the next 3 months creating a collection of their finest work. Wooden animals so detailed they looked ready to move. Cloth dolls with personalities stitched into every seam. Puzzles and games and toys that combined their skills into something neither could have made alone. When they packed the crates for shipping, Finnegan felt a mixture of pride and terror. The exposition was in high summer, and Finnegan made the journey to the capital while Sierra stayed behind with the children. He spent 3 days at the great hall where the crafts were displayed, talking to buyers and answering questions about their process. People were curious about the orc woman who had partnered with a human toy maker, and Finnegan found himself telling their story again and again. When he returned home, he brought contracts for more work than they could complete in a year, and a medal that the judges had awarded their collection for excellence in collaborative craftsmanship. Sierra held the medal and cried, and Finnegan held her while she did. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it. You did it. Your talent, your skill, I just helped. We did it together." Sierra pulled back and kissed him. "Everything we have built together." That night, after the children were asleep and the shop was quiet, they sat at their workbench and talked about the future. About hiring other workers to help with the increased demand. About teaching Marisol and Bertrand the trade so they could take over someday. About making toys that would travel across the kingdom and perhaps beyond, carrying their message of cooperation and hope. 3 years after that, Sierra gave birth to a son they named Harold. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's quiet temperament, and he loved nothing more than sitting on Finnegan's lap while his father carved. The shop had expanded by then, taking over the building next door and employing 3 other workers, 2 orcs, and a human woman, who had impressed them with her skill at painting. Marisol was 13 and already taking commissions of her own, specializing in detailed cloth dolls with elaborate wardrobes. Bertrand was 11, and showing signs of surpassing his father's skill with a carving knife. Willa was 5 and had decided she wanted to make toys that moved, spending hours designing mechanisms with Finnegan's patient help. The town of Millbrook Ford had changed too. More orc families had moved across the river and into the main part of town. The children played together at school, and while prejudice had not disappeared entirely, it had been forced to make room for understanding. Gareth Moss had left town 2 years earlier, his business failing after too many customers learned about his dishonest practices. The general store was now run by an orc man who was scrupulously fair in all his dealings. On a cold winter evening, 10 years almost to the day after Finnegan had first watched Sierra hurry past his shop window, the family gathered in their living quarters above the shop for dinner. The table was crowded with 6 people now, and loud with conversation and laughter. Harold was trying to convince Willa to trade desserts while Marisol rolled her eyes and Bertrand told an elaborate story about something that had happened at school. Sierra caught Finnegan's eye across the table and smiled, a private smile full of shared memories and quiet joy. He smiled back, marveling at how much his life had changed, how the lonely widower he had been was now surrounded by noise and love and the everyday chaos of family. After dinner, while Sierra put the younger children to bed, Finnegan and Bertrand went down to the shop to finish a special commission, a rocking horse for the mayor's grandchild. It was a significant order, a sign of how far they had come, and Finnegan worked carefully on the details while Bertrand painted the mane. "Father," Bertrand said suddenly, the title he had started using naturally about 2 years after the wedding. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different? Different how?" Finnegan asked, focusing on the delicate carving of the horse's ears. "If you had not been outside sweeping that morning, if you had not started talking to us, if you had been like all the other shopkeepers who shooed us away." Bertrand's voice was thoughtful. "We would be somewhere else now, or maybe we would not be anywhere. Maybe we would have starved or frozen that winter after Mama lost her job at the bakery." Finnegan set down his knife and looked at his son, for that was what Bertrand was now in every way that mattered. "I think about it sometimes, but I try not to dwell on might have beens. We are here now. That is what matters. I am glad you swept your shop that morning." Bertrand's voice was fierce with emotion. "I am glad you saw us. I am glad you did not look away." "So am I." Finnegan pulled Bertrand into a hug, something the boy was usually too old for but accepted now. "So am I." Upstairs, Sierra was reading to Willa and Harold, her voice soft and soothing as she turned the pages of their favorite story. Marisol was in her corner working on a new doll design, her needle flashing in the lamplight. The rooms that had once felt empty now overflowed with life, and Finnegan would not have changed a single thing. Years continued to pass, bringing the usual mix of joy and sorrow, triumph, and struggle. Marisol married an orc man from the next town over, a gentle soul who worked as a carpenter. Bertrand took over more of the toy shop's operations as Finnegan's hands grew stiff with age. Willa invented a line of mechanical toys that became wildly popular, and Harold discovered a talent for teaching, starting a small school where human and orc children learned together. Finnegan and Sierra grew old together, their hair graying and their steps slowing, but their love only deepening with time. On the morning of their 20th wedding anniversary, they took a walk through Millbrook Ford together, holding hands like young people in the grip of first love. They passed the corner where Finnegan's shop had been, now expanded and run primarily by Bertrand with help from his younger siblings. They passed the spot where Sierra had been confronted by Moss, where Finnegan had stood beside her and refused to let lies win. They passed the church, where human families worshipped, and the clearing by the river where orc families gathered, and they saw people of both races going about their lives, no longer entirely separate but woven together through work and friendship and marriage. "We did something good," Sierra said quietly, stopping to look at the thriving town around them. "We made a difference. You made a difference. You had the courage to stay when it would have been easier to leave, the courage to love when the world said it was wrong." Finnegan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I just followed your lead." "We followed each other." Sierra leaned against him, and they stood there for a long moment, watching the life they had helped create swirl around them. That evening, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration dinner. The table was enormous now, stretched across both rooms of the expanded living quarters, and it groaned under the weight of food and flowers and candles. There were 12 people around the table: Finnegan and Sierra, their 4 children and their spouses, and 4 grandchildren ranging from toddlers to teenagers. After the meal, Willa stood and raised her glass. "To parents who taught us that love is stronger than prejudice, that courage is quieter than we think, and that the best way to change the world is to be kind to one person at a time." Everyone drank, and Finnegan felt tears prick his eyes. Sierra squeezed his hand under the table, and he squeezed back, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. Later, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Finnegan and Sierra sat in their favorite spot by the window, looking out at the street where it had all begun. Sierra was dozing against his shoulder, tired from the long day of celebration, and Finnegan found himself thinking back to that first morning when he had seen an orc mother hurrying her children past his shop. He had been so lonely then, so lost in grief that he could barely see the world around him. But something had made him notice Sierra and her children. Some instinct had told him to slow down, to look closer, to reach out with kindness rather than turn away in indifference or fear. That decision had changed everything. It had given him a family again, a purpose, a reason to wake up each morning with hope instead of emptiness. It had taught him that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the courage to choose differently could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. As Sierra's breathing deepened into sleep, and the stars came out over Millbrook Ford, Finnegan allowed himself to feel the full weight of his contentment. This life, this family, this love, it was everything he had needed without knowing he needed it. And it had all started because an orc mother had walked her children past a toy shop, and the man who owned it had started walking slower, paying attention, choosing to see rather than to look away. In the end, that was all it had taken. One person choosing kindness. One person refusing to accept the world's ugliness as inevitable. One person believing that change was possible, one small gesture at a time. Finnegan kissed the top of Sierra's head and closed his eyes, letting himself drift into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, he rested in the perfect peace of knowing he had lived a life that mattered, surrounded by people who loved him, in a world that was better because he and Sierra had dared to love across the lines society had drawn. And somewhere in the darkness, in a small bedroom down the hall, their grandchildren dreamed of the toys they would make, and the stories they would tell, carrying forward the legacy of courage and kindness their grandparents had built. The work was not finished, it never would be finished, because each generation would face its own battles and make its own choices. But the foundation was solid, built on the bedrock truth that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to try. Finnegan and Sierra had been brave enough. And in being brave, they had changed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone who came after them, rippling outward in circles of hope that would spread farther than they could ever know. That was the true magic of their story, not that an orc and a human had fallen in love, though that was remarkable enough, but that they had refused to let the world's hatred dim their light, and in shining brightly, they had shown others that a different world was possible. The shop below was dark and quiet now, but tomorrow it would fill with light and laughter and the sound of toys being made. Children would come to learn and play, human and orc learning side by side, seeing each other as friends rather than enemies. And somewhere, in a town they would never visit, another person would hear the story of the toy shop in Millbrook Ford and think maybe, just maybe, things could be different where they lived too. That was the legacy Finnegan and Sierra left behind, not just toys or even a successful business, but proof that ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary love could change the world. One toy at a time, one child at a time, one brave choice at a time. And that, in the end, was all anyone could do, and all anyone needed to do to make the world a better place.